Before we wire up events and event listeners, we need to get really good at finding elements on a web page. Now, there are multiple ways we can select elements in the DOM, and each one of those shine in different situations. In this video, we're going to be talking about some of those ways. Now, over here, I'm going to start with this simple HTML page just so I can have a few targets that I can grab. Here we have an H1 with an ID of title. We have two sections, one for groceries and one for hardware. Each one of those have their own respective H2, an unnumbered list, and an input and a button that we can use to actually capture input from the user and potentially adding them into the list. Now I want you to note some of the selectors that we have over here. So obviously we have all the tag names. We also have the IDs. We have different classes like list and items. We also have the data attribute like the data action and the data list. And a lot of these are good selectors or good hooks that we can use to select elements on our web page. Now, obviously at the end, I also have my JavaScript files. So let me go ahead and maybe split the screen between the two just so we have them both. And let's go ahead and get started with the first one. Let's get elements by ID. This is something that we already demonstrated in the previous video, but we can do something like this. Const title equal document dot get element by ID, where the ID here is title. Now we could also do the same from the console in our browser. So if I do document dot get element by ID, I think I made a typo in the word document. So the ID we're looking for here is title. And if I do that, it actually outputs a reference to the elements in the web page. And if I hover over that, it will also highlight it on the web page. Now let's go back to our JavaScript code over here. We can do something like console log the title the text content. And if we save that, we see that the shopping list comes back in our console. We can also change the styles of our title. So we could do title.style.border bottom. And let's do a 2 pixel of a solid line of the color, whatever that color is, a little bit brown here, I think. If I hit save, we get this updated style on the page. Get element by ID is the simplest and fastest way that we can grab unique elements of a page if it has an ID. Because as we know, IDs should be unique on any web page, so there shouldn't be too many items that have the same item or the same ID on the same web page. If for whatever mistake we've made, we've had multiple items with the same ID, just keep in mind that JavaScript is always going to find the first occurrence of that, and that's the one that you're going to be working with. Now, another way we could use to select elements on our web page is by using the document.getElements by class name or getElements by tag name. Both of these, they don't return really a true array. They return something called an HTML collection, which is a live collection that keeps updating every time a change happens on the web page. So if we come over here and we do const, let's do lists equal, we could do document.getElements by class name, where the class name that we are interested in here is the class list, because both of our sections or both of our lists have that same class. So over here, if I do list and print out how many lists do we have, so list.length, save, we get back 2. So if for whatever reason you had another functionality that was able to add another list to the web page, this number will dynamically be updated to 3. We could also do the same thing with get me all the LIs or list items. That will be document.getElements by tag name, where the tag name that we're looking for here is LI. Now keep in mind, both of these are get elements, while the one with the ID is get element. That is, as we said, ID can only return one item, while these should be able to return multiple items at once, or a live collection of all the elements that match those criteria. So same thing, if we do console log, whatever the all allies dot length is, we get back 6 because we have 3 in each list. And as I mentioned, because these are not true arrays, they are what we call HTML collection. If you were to loop over them somehow, you would need to use something like array from, and that's where you will provide your reference to this HTML collection. So over here, I could loop over all the list items, and for each list item, let's modify the style, where the list style would be square. So if I hit save, notice how all of these here little dot, they became circled or squares instead. Now let's move on to another way we could also select elements on a web page, and this is kind of like the CSS superpowers or super selector that we could use here. These are, let me add a comment, the query selector and the query selector all. And let's see what that looks like in a second. So these are incredibly flexible, and they can use any of the CSS selectors that you may be used to or that you may have used in your web development classes to modify your CSS styles on a web page. So let's just go ahead and demo some of that. So over here we have items that we have called featured items, or they have the class of featured. Now obviously we can select them by doing the get elements by class name, but over here I want to show you a different one. So here we could do show me the first featured element, and what that would be is document.query selector. Now, because these are very flexible and they can be used to select elements by tag name, class names, IDs, you name it, we're gonna have to use certain symbols to indicate whatever we're looking for. So if we're looking for a class, as you may know, in CSS, we would refer to that by the dot. So we can do dot featured. So we could change the styles of that. So first featured dot style dot background equals lavender. And if I hit save, you notice how the background for this item has changed, but it's only the first occurrence of whatever matches this criteria right here. We could also use it to find all featured by using the query selector all. And if I now hit save, you notice we have an error. First feature is not defined. Okay, line 16, right over here, we renamed the variable, but we did not update this line. So if we save it, okay, cannot set properties of undefined setting the background. So let's see what is happening here. Oh yeah, because this is returning a collection and I'm trying to act as if it was a single item. That is where I went wrong. So I'm gonna need to convert this into an array, and I'm gonna loop over this array. Let's do it over multiple lines. So for each featured item, we want to do the following, which is to basically modify the style of the featured item to have the lavender background color. Hit save, and here we go. Both of our elements have been updated. Also, actually, the all featured here is actually an array as it comes back from query selector. So if I hit save, that should work without needing to convert it into an array first. That was only needed in the cases of get elements by class name and get elements by tag name, because both of these, as you can see in the tooltip, are returning HTML collections instead of a node list or an array. We could also do a scoped search, which basically means that once I have a container, I can search, or I can use the query selector all or query selector or any of our selector methods here to only search within that scope or within that container rather than the entire document or the entire web page. So what that means is if I create a grocery sections, grocery section using document.get, or sorry, query selector, and I'm gonna use the data attribute here, and our attribute name is list. So we're gonna be looking for groceries, and just to demonstrate that this will work, if I copy this, paste it into my console, I get this warning. Well, let me do allow pasting. This is basically a security control that just tries to ensure that you're not trying to inject any malicious code. So if I do allow pasting and now I paste my code again, that should work. So if I run this, okay, we have an error. It says query selector failed to execute it because data list equals groceries is not a valid selector. Oh, I see. I made a typo here. I should encapsulate the whole thing in a square bracket rather than just the data list part. So over here, our query selector is find me all the items that match this criteria or that have a data list of type or of value groceries. So again, if I copy this, let's test it in the browser before we actually run it in our JavaScript code or in our JavaScript file. All right, here we go. We get that section highlighted. We know we are able to select the correct item here. So the scoped search here means that I'm able to do something like this. Groceries or grocery items would be grocery sections dot query selector all, find me all the list items that live within the grocery section. So this is a scoped search, meaning that I'm only searching for list items that live within that area rather than searching for all the list items in the entire document or in the entire web page. Let's try to loop over those grocery items, and for each item, let's go ahead and modify the style for it by changing maybe the font weight of those to 700. That will make it a bold text instead. So if I hit save, here we go. Also, because all of the list items that we have within our unnumbered list here also have the class of item, we could use classes and we can search by dot item instead of all tag names that are list items. If I hit save, or actually before I do that, let me change this to 600 just so we can see slight difference when I save and make sure that we were able to select the right thing. Hard to tell the difference really, so let's go ahead and maybe add item.style.color red, just so we show we were able to select our correct list here. I'll go ahead and remove that now. Now, because the things that we pass into our query selectors here are basically CSS selector, we can do a bunch of other fancy things like using pseudo classes or finding the descendants of an item and so on and so forth. Let's go ahead and actually see what I mean by that, or what that looks like. If I wanted to select the first child or first item in each one of those lists, we could do something that looks like this. First child in each list, or let's just call it item instead of child. First item in each list equal document.query selector all, because we want to select multiple ones. I'm gonna do that on a separate line just so we have the full length of the line to demonstrate that. So what I'm looking for is all the lists, and our list, I can either select them by just a class, or I could be more explicit and say, get me all the sections that have the class of list. Actually, let me take this and do it in the browser first, just so we can catch any errors before we try to bring it back into the JavaScript file. So if I paste that in, you see how my selector right now is selecting two lists, but really I'm looking for the list items within those lists. That is actually gonna bring 6 items, which means it's all of them. So this is where we use something called the pseudo class first child. This is something that you should be familiar with from your CSS education. And now if I hit enter and hover over each one of those items, here's the first item in the first list, and here's the first item in the second list. So this is basically the final code that we should bring back into here. And with this variable, I was able to capture the first child of each list. Again, these are CSS selectors, so we could use something like the combinators to find the descendants or the children of an item. So I could do hardware items using something like this document, the query selector all, where data list equal hardware, and within that let's find all the unnumbered lists, and within that we want to find all the list items. Let me fix the indentation, and before I save it, let's try it over here. Paste it. Here we go. We were able to select the 3 items in the hardware data list here. So really a lot of different ways that you could be selecting items in the DOM. So again, to recap everything, if you're selecting one unique item, you probably want to be selecting or using one of these 2 over here, where it's get element by ID or one selector, and you have to figure out exactly the right selector that you want to use. If you are targeting multiple elements by their class names or by their tag name, you could use one of these 2. Just keep in mind that they return HTML collections, which are not arrays by default. So if you want to loop over them somehow, you'll need to convert them into an array first. And then finally, we could use the query selector and the query selector all, which would allow us to use any of the CSS selectors that we can use, including combinators, including pseudo classes like first child, every other child, that sort of thing. And then the last thing that we talked about in this video was the scope search, that if you wanted to narrow down your search for speed and clarity, you could do something like this, where in the when we were looking for the groceries items, we did not search for the groceries item in the entire page, but rather within an already selected subset of the page. So in this case, we selected the groceries list, and then we searched for the items within that groceries sections instead of the entire page. Now, just one more side note here about what the data attributes are. If you're not familiar with those, these are extremely flexible, and they allow you to kind of separate your styling from your attribute or from your behavior in the application. That is because classes are generally or mostly always used for styling, that you want to capture all the things with a certain class to update their styles. However, data lists, they can be used for your behavior. And these are not set by the browser, they're not set by HTML, they're not set by CSS. You can name them whatever you want. So you could do data dash whatever you want. So in our case, we did data dash list and data dash action, and we're able to use them as selectors in our code later on.